You're watching The Legal Breakdown. So, Glenn, we got a pretty definitive update from Trump's Georgia trial. That was one of the trials that we were looking at closely now that we're likely to not see any movement in Florida and also D.C. So can you give an explanation of what just happened down in Georgia?
Yeah, Brian, I'm not going to bury the lead. There is now no chance that Donald Trump will go to trial in his RICO case in Georgia before the election. Why is that? Well, you may remember that after Judge McAfee ruled that District Attorney Fani Willis absolutely can stay on the case, can continue to head up the prosecution of Donald Trump and all of his criminal associates, his co-conspirators. Donald Trump and company appealed it to the Georgia Court of Appeals. And Fani Willis filed something which I'm going to call a long shot motion saying, wait a minute. You don't need to take this up on appeal. There is no legal issue that needs to be resolved based on the ruling that was handed down by Judge McAfee. So she asked the appeals court to return it directly to Judge McAfee without taking it up on appeal, hoping, perhaps against hope, that she could get it back on the trial track and maybe there was a chance it would be tried before the November election. Well, now the appeals court just said, nope, we're keeping it. We're setting it for oral argument when? December 5th, a month after the presidential election, because, what's the rush? It's only the guy running for president as the Republican nominee who tried to steal the election from the people of Georgia. And Brian, he did it, for gosh sakes, on audio tape. Just find me 11,780 votes and corruptly declare me the winner. Why would we want to go about trying to hold him accountable before he could potentially get reelected and finish the job? In other words, finish off our democracy. But that is now where we are.
Glenn, obviously, the decision by Fani Willis to have an affair with another prosecutor on the team was a stupid decision, and it's created some issues here. But in fairness, isn't it also likely that this case would have been pushed off because Donald Trump's defense team would have taken the Supreme Court's immunity decision and asked Judge McAfee and then appealed this over and over again to see whether the immunity decision impacts the ability for prosecutors to even carry forward with this case?
Almost certainly. High likelihood that would have happened, just like the Supreme Court's horrific, a president is king, a president is above the law. What the Supreme Court did is they demoted our democracy to a monarchy, plain and simple. The Supreme Court decision almost certainly would have ended up derailing the Georgia state prosecution. That is the horrific decision that a president is, in essence, a king. He's above the law. The Supreme Court seems determined to demote our democracy to a monarchy. And just as the Supreme Court opinion has at least impeded Donald Trump's sentencing date in his New York case, where he stands criminally convicted of 34 felonies for trying to basically rob the American people of their vote in the 2016 presidential election, they are now litigating the impact of the Supreme Court decision on that case to see whether they can proceed to sentencing or whether there might be some other remedy or fix that they need to put in place. It almost certainly would have at least delayed or maybe derailed the Georgia state prosecution, but it's not a certainty. They could have gone about litigating, for example, whether it was an official presidential act for a president to call the Secretary of State down in Georgia and demand that he just come up with enough votes to declare Donald Trump the winner. Call me crazy, Brian, not an official act of a sitting president. And I think they actually could have resolved that issue and then moved in the direction of a trial. Of course, Donald Trump would have tried to sort of jump over into the federal system and beat feet up to the Supreme Court to try to, call in some more favors from, Justice Thomas and Justice Alito. So, yeah, but this pretty much seals the deal. We don't even have to wonder if the Supreme Court decision would have derailed the Georgia RICO prosecution. Consider it derailed.
Now, Glenn, let's just do a thought experiment for a moment and say, in the event, God forbid, that Donald Trump wins the presidency in November, and we have this pending case. This one in Georgia is different because, the New York one is done. We're waiting sentencing right now, or to see if the immunity decision applies. and which will determine whether or not there is sentencing, if he wins, he'll be able to use his own DOJ to wipe out the prosecutions in both D.C. and in Florida, which, the Florida one already had an axe taken to it by Judge Cannon. But this Georgia prosecution is different because the president doesn't have pardon power to pardon himself over a state prosecution anyway. But with that said, if he becomes president, would it basically be on Fani Willis to put this case on ice for 4 years while Donald Trump is still president, knowing full well that if he was prosecuted while he was president, the OLC memo, for example, stating that a sitting president can't be prosecuted would apply, and any conviction would ultimately be rendered moot by Donald Trump's own federal government?
In case somebody needs more bad news on the legal front, Brian, I think you're exactly right. In the recent Supreme Court President is King opinion that was handed down, they actually cited the OLC, the Office of Legal Counsel memo, that renders an opinion saying that a sitting president can't be prosecuted. They would use that. They would use the Supremacy Clause of the Constitution to say if a sitting president can't be prosecuted in federal court, then he certainly can't be prosecuted in state court because federal law is supreme and trumps, I hate that word, trumps state law and state court proceedings. So you're exactly right. It would likely be put on ice for at least the 4 years that Donald Trump was president. But, given that he's told us he's going to be a dictator on day one, I expect that he intends to stay in office even beyond his 4-year term.
Now, in that case, would there be anything that Donald Trump would be able to do to wipe away that pending trial, or would he just have to wait for that pending trial until he's out of office and he wouldn't be able to do anything to impact it?
Brian, it depends on whether he wants to flex his absolute presidential immunity muscle, because the Supreme Court gave him permission to act lawlessly and nobody can do a damn thing about it because he's got absolute immunity. So I don't put anything past Donald Trump to use those newly acquired powers to do anything necessary to put an end, a stop, to permanently get rid of any state court prosecution against him. I think that's the way this country is trending if Donald Trump is reelected.
Let's finish off with this, because I think that we do need to caveat this kind of stuff, because it is a lot of doom and gloom, and we have had a lot of stuff, almost like an astonishing amount of stuff break in Donald Trump's favor, from Donald Trump's debate performance to the Supreme Court rulings to the Florida case being dismissed to even, Donald Trump walking away from an assassination attempt invigorated, basically. So what's your message to people watching right now who feel like, the only response to this is just despair because this guy just keeps getting away with it and it feels very much like he's going to prevail as the result of this?
We have one last opportunity, and it's an important one, and frankly, it was always what would save us from an aspiring day one dictator. There will not be another jury impaneled in any of Donald Trump's criminal cases. But the good news is every single person who's listening to us and watching us, you all have been selected to serve on the final jury, the jury that is standing between Donald Trump and dictatorship. And in a very real sense, we, the people, are now we, the jurors. And what we get to do is go to the polls on November 5 and cast our vote just as if we were selected to serve on one of the criminal juries that would sit in judgment on Donald Trump. And Brian, we are all going to vote on November 5th that Donald Trump is guilty, and he has absolutely no business retaking the reins of governmental power. So if we do our job as jurors, not just voters, we vote him guilty on November 5th, and we come out in numbers too big to rig and too real to steal, well, that will be us saving us, and it was always up to us. So we've got to get out to the polls.
Perfectly put. Just the message that we need to end this on. With that said, for those watching right now, if you want to stay on top of all of these prosecutions as they continue to progress, as well as any legal news that pops up, please make sure to subscribe. The links to both of our channels are right here on this screen. I'm Brian Taylor Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.